Hi folks, welcome to The Way I Do It. My name is Chris if you haven't been here before, and if you have been, it's still Chris. Today we're going to be doing the right rear brake on my 2015 Ram 3500 four-wheel drive dual rear wheels. We're going to be doing the rotor, brake pads, and the caliper. And when we get into it, you'll see why. So let's get the wheel off and get to it. Because it's corroded, let's take a closer look at this. So we live in the PRNY, Southern Tier, New York. They use salt. This tire's only been on here since July or August. I had tires put on it, but you can see the corrosion, and it's stuck. First thing I do is I'll take a nice sledge and use the side of it against the tire sidewall. We can put a little heat. Look at this. You can see that brake pad is gone. You see the inner brake pad. That is pretty much worn out too. So I'm going to replace the rotor because of this rust buildup. The thickness is probably adequate. Can measure it with a caliper, but I'm sure it's adequate. You could have them turned, but some of these are heat. Those are heat checks, and what that means is it's been hot and the structure of the iron is different, so you have hard spots and soft spots. So yeah, with all this rust. The other thing is the parking brake, which is inside this, is going to be a mess. So I'm going to just completely remove the caliper and not worry about it, and then pull the hub. Now, another thing I want to say right now, this is put together with Loctite, so I got to pull the axle to get the hub off. Okay, this has been off before. You can see no Loctite on here. There should be Loctite on. I probably could use my pneumatic impact or my electric impact here, but if I can get this, Now, this is probably not going to come off that easy because of the ridges on the rotor. So you can see there's been some scraping in here. Now that scraping's not from anything screwed up. What the scraping is from is the rust buildup on the rotor. And that's something you might hear if your brakes are old. You can see the uneven wear on the brake pad. This is where the squealer would be. And I can't say that it was making any noise. But you can see how worn these brake pads are. This is 2023. They were put on in 2019. That's 4 years in the southern tier of New York. Like I say, I think this has been changed because these are going back in. I don't know if this is going to move, but my pins were seized on the other side, so I'm just going to do both, and then they'll be warranted through my local parts store. The 8 bolts holding the axle to the hub are locked in place with medium strength blue Loctite. Applying a little bit of heat will make them easy to remove, but it's not entirely necessary. Blue Loctite is good to about 350 degrees. This is actually a 9/16 socket that I just destroyed, but it's supposed to be an impact and it failed from Taiwan. Okay. The axle's loose, just pull it out. So the way these new ones are held on, there's no clip to bend over or anything like an old one. This has this locking tab, has that little ear on it. That was to go in the groove so it doesn't rotate and spin off. You see right there is a key, and that key has got to come out. Let me get something else. Okay, so for this nut, there's going to be a special socket for it. But what I have is a punch that fits right in the hole. That's a round hole. So you can see if I get it, see that key move? If I get that right in the middle, then maybe I can fish it out. If you got a really strong magnet, that might work too, but see that? Fished it out with my screwdriver. And that's your... nothing special about it. It's just a little lock and key. Here's the spot where you can check the preload. So I'm using this just to tap it to check what preload was on it when I took it apart, because we want it to be the same when we put it back together. So here we come around. There's one flat, we don't want to go too tight because we'll flat spot the Timken bearings. So you can see how tight it is. So we went past, this is where we started, we went past that one. So that's where we probably want to be. Put it right back the way it was when we put it together. Although it may seem a little bit loose, that is where we want it. Now on the back side of here, the rear seal is a seal that doesn't ride on the surface of the axle like old ones. It's actually on its own race. So the race for the seal fits on the axle with a rubber seal. So chances are it's going to get destroyed when we pull it apart. Now what I've done is I've left the nut on here so the bearing doesn't plop out on the ground. There. We'll go ahead and pull this nut. Keeping this clean isn't a real big deal, but the cleaner you keep it, the better, because we're going to wash it before we put it back together. Now this one is really spotless. One on the other side I took out had a lot of gunk on it. You want to look at this. You want to check all the bearings, make sure there's no discoloration, no galling, nothing. Okay, so there's your brake shoes for the parking brake. All right. So this is what it looks like on the inside. So this brake shoe came off the parking brake. And so did this one. They were just laying there loose. You can see I don't use a parking brake. So you can see where it was rubbing and holding. So the next step is we're going to take out the 4 bolts that hold this tone ring in for your ABS. This is part of the seal, so the seal did get destroyed.
And buy a set that has an E18, or go to the Snap-on tool truck and pay $50 for a socket, whatever.
So again, there's your Loctite. There's a lot of places you don't know if somebody has removed a bolt that had Loctite on it and cleaned it and then put it back without Loctite. So you can't just say if there was Loctite, put Loctite back. You have to be a little more careful. Some bolts you can get away with that, but these I would not. So you're going to want to take these to a wire brush on a bench grinder and clean all that Loctite off so you get the proper torque going back in and you get a good bond with the Loctite. Ideally you would go into the hub with a tap and clean them out, but I'm not going to do that. Here is a 9/16. It's a 6-point socket, and you can see that does appear to fit pretty good. It's a 6-point impact socket, but again, you're not getting a good grip on these like you would with the inverted Torx. Yeah, that is inverted Torx, T-O-R-X. Yeah, you want to have the correct tool, because if you mess that up, what are you going to do? You saw how hard the impact worked to get out. My impact, by the way, is a Porter cable, corded. I picked it up at an auction for $5. It was like new. Okay, there's your monster bearing. So there's a bearing, cleaned, packed with fresh axle grease. This has got a metallic color to it. It's a CarQuest grease. You might say, Chris, it says don't do it. It says, Chris, put in gear lube. Chris, use a light grease. Well, here's a case. I own it, it's mine, I'm doing this. My original seals made it 370,000 miles. I don't know how long the truck's going to last. You can see this is complete, one piece. But see, this inner one rotates. So the chance of taking this apart, I'm going to grease this. So if I ever do take it apart, it's got a better chance of coming apart. You'll say, well, Chris, maybe the grease will make the rubber swell. Well, I think the grease will have a better chance of making it come apart. Here it says NAK. Here it says ST40 72.5 108 18.8. This measures about 4 1/4 OD, which would be what? The ID is 2.844. Makes me think it could be the 72.5. I mean, the overall width is about 730. Like I've seen, you can just push them in. You don't need any special tool or press. So if you twist them like that, they're forgiving. What you want to do is get it all the way in, so it runs true. Plug this hole to keep the debris out. With a bit of blue medium strength Loctite on the bolts, put them all in place first and then torque them down. Because I live in the PRNY, rust and corrosion is a problem. I never use my parking brake. Never have, never intend to. You might say, what happens when the rotor gets hot? That grease is going to migrate out on the rotor. I don't think so. You might say, well, Rain Man Ray would never do that. No, because he works on other people's cars in the state of Florida. You might say, Chris Fix would never do that. Well, I don't think Chris Fix does much. You might say, Scotty Kilmer would never do that. Again, Scotty worked on people's cars in Texas. And finally, does South Main Auto do that? He might do it on his own vehicle. I know he hates the PRNY. Okay, next step is the tone ring. I'm going to clean this off a little bit and get that out of there. Off camera, I'm going to clean this up a little bit with a spray. Here's your tone ring. This torque spec was tough to find. I'm going to say 10 to 15 foot-pounds max. Okay, now I'm going to pull 11. These parking brake shoes off, and I'm going to have it back like that. Okay, so there it is. It's all in place. I've greased these. I lubricated the mechanism here. Got those in place. Now, that is facing forward. Okay, that's forward. All right. Here's how I got those. Okay, so right here we're going to load the parking brake shoes. I've got the springs, I got the spreader all cleaned up. I wire brushed them to remove most of the rust because rust actually has water in it. Okay, so a trick to put this spring in, I believe, makes it go kind of like that, and then just like that. See, that can be a little frustrating, but just like that. See, can be frustrating, but it drops right in there. And then of course this spring goes on top, and this would go this way for the right hand side with this forward. Okay, so to hold the parking brake shoe in place, well, I apply the retaining clip. Use a nice pair of vice grips like that. For the other side, with that, I have the big vice grips. Okay? And don't be too crazy because you can bend things. Just make sure it's tight enough to hold it in place so you can put the clip on. It's like having an extra set of hands. Yes, we're going to douse it. So, you douse it, clean the threads out. Once you've doused it, it's clean. You don't need to wipe it down and introduce other debris. Now we're all set to put the rotor back in place. Our packed outer wheel bearing. So now we want to get this not terribly tight, just tap it. I actually think, oh, see how it's got just a little drag on it. That's a little preload. Now if you remember when we took it off, let's get a closer look. When we took it off, this is where it was when it was fully tight. So we want to take and back it out. It's a little, okay, and back it right to there. Remember, because it went past that one to the next one. Then we'll take our little keyway and it just slides right back in there and just sits there. Okay, so the next thing is this. So that little notch, the little hook on the end, see it right there? The little hook's got to go in the keyway, and then we'll just take and walk it. Just walk it around. Just get that on there. Maybe we can push it on a little more. Get that on there. That sits down in a, that'll find its way into a thread, so it's not going to fall off. So there. Now, these are funny. Not sure what that is. So now we can just throw our axle in. And what I like to do is just put some grease on here. The gasket looks good, and I'll seal it with grease. I don't like the idea of using silicone. I have in the past, but silicone can find its way into the bearing, into the rear end. Grease actually is a good sealer. When I worked in lab in college, we actually used grease to seal vacuum. They had vacuum experiments in the lab, and all the fittings, actually the grease was Never Seas, I'll tell you that. We used Never Seas as a sealant on the piping for the vacuum system. So yeah, that was a long time ago, but okay, let's throw the axle in. So this is what you get for a, what they call a rebuilt, remanufactured caliper. It's got different bolts, which is unfortunate. That's the bolt that came with the vehicle. They give you this one with a smaller head. You always have to disassemble these for inspection. They're put together just for shipping, so they fit in the box. So if that's the same thread, I'm going to keep my old bolts. So we'll set the caliper aside for a moment. And these just pop out like that. They come with a high temperature grease, but what we're going to do is wipe it off, because who really likes seeing clear high temperature grease on them? Now you got to figure they're in it to make a profit. So this ceramic extreme brake part lubricant contains ceramic solids. Because it's from Permatex, it's got to be better, right? You see there's already, see that funny discoloration? Before we go this far, we'll take this right apart. Make sure it goes in the hole. Now, these are often loose. Loose is probably better than tight, but who wants it too loose? Yeah, if it's loose, it's less likely to seize, although it can get water in it easier. So we'll just douse that up with a good lube that we paid good money for, and we'll just push that right in there and make sure it's clipped on. Okay, and that's going to have some entrapped air. We'll actually work to get that entrapped air out. We'll do the same thing on this one, which, look at this garbage. See, it's brown. That means there was rust inside there, which means they probably did not get that. But it's good and sloppy and free and brown. So let's take and lube that up. Years ago, you had to buy the brackets separately. Now it's just become real common just to buy it with a bracket, because these are always stuck. But you know, the thing is, if you take your old one, if you can work at it and get these out, who cares? You know? These have probably just been soaked in some kind of rust remover, maybe sandblasted. Okay, now you got something you can work with. So the next step, typically both your brake pads and your new caliper come with the shims. So get your goodies out. You get your crush washer, a new bolt for the banjo fitting, and then these shims. Being that we're in the PRNY, I'm going to lubricate under the shim. as a rust inhibitor with this special ceramic grease. I don't quite understand what ceramic solids are doing for lubrication, but now in the clip, this little spring retainer goes to the outside. If it was on the inside, it would hit the rotor. There. So you have to inspect the brake pads. These are 100% the same. If you're doing an F-150, for example, in the front, they're different. There's an inner and outer. They look very similar, but there's an inner and outer. You can put them together, but they won't be right. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Lubricate. Just everything gets... Now the stainless won't corrode. Now, even though these are the nice ones with this silencer, this backing, I don't know if you can you see that? It's a nice brake pad. It's a CarQuest, what do they call it? Professional Frontline SD. I don't know why it's not HD. But even though that's on there, I am still going to douse the contact areas of the caliper with grease. Now honestly, I don't know if this ceramic grease is any good. I mean, to me, ceramic's always been abrasive, but I guess this is a ceramic grease. Just douse everything here. Corrosion protection, sound deadening, whatever you want to call it. And then we can put, okay, they're like a pull-off clip, so they go outside. Just pull it so it doesn't drag and get hot. Let's get this around here like this, and we can throw our caliper right over the top, and we'll take our bolt. Now, some people might Loctite these. I've had these come loose. I've lost them. I'm not going to Loctite them. There we go. It's that size. Good and tight. Comment below if you know the torque spec for this bolt. Don't go too far. If you feel it start to go a little easier, you know you went too far. Let's get this out too, because under the vehicle it's a little harder to get loose. Put the new bolt in. After you clean the banjo fitting, put on new crush washers. So here's what I've done. I cracked the bleeder open. While I was working on the hub, the brake line was hanging and the fluid drained out of the system, which is not a bad thing. I had the bucket, it's right there. But the fluid drained out of the system, which means I get fresh fluid. It's not a real flush, but it's better than nothing. So now that I see this dripping, can be somewhat sure that through gravity it's bled. Now what I'll do is I'll drive it a bit and then I'll get a helper to do the standard 3 pumps, hold it, crack it, 3 pumps, hold it, crack it. Look for some air to come out. Next thing we need to do after we close that bleeder, next thing I do, I'm going to grease this hub because in the PRNY we've got rust. I don't want that wheel stuck on again. Okay, this is just regular, good old axle grease. And I like my studs lubed. I know, don't do it on a customer car, but I like my studs lubed because I've seen lug nuts that were seized in place. So folks, that's how you change a brake rotor, the pads, the caliper, the parking brake on the back of a 2015 Ram 3500 Dually diesel. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, ring that bell. Nah, don't ring the bell. Just subscribe. Thanks. Bye.